Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here with all of you. My name is Michael J. Wilson. I am the director of Maryland Hunger Solutions, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have about the intersection of food insecurity, race, and all the challenges that so many of our communities face. I'm going to begin by introducing myself, and then I'm going to turn to each of you so you can introduce yourselves before we begin with a series of questions for the audience that's here. So Maryland Hunger Solutions is actually a project of the Food Research and Action Center. And our work here in Maryland is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, statewide organization is very simply to end hunger in the state of Maryland. And we do that by utilizing all of the existing federal and state nutrition programs. We work with schools around school meals. We work with communities around SNAP. We work with the WIC program. We work all across the state. In fact, one of the ways people get SNAP in the state of Maryland is called a partner organization like Maryland Hunger Solutions. We also use advocacy because we know that there's an opportunity and a role for our government, our federal government, our state government, our local government to help address hunger in our communities. And we want to make sure that that happens. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce let each of you introduce yourselves. And I'm going to go as I normally go in reverse alphabetical order. So I'm going to start with Cyan Lujan. Cyan.
Hello, thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cyan, and I represent the No to the Gay the Third Foundation. The NB3 Foundation was founded in 2005 by No to the Gay the Third, a Native American professional golfer and four-time PGA winner, to counter the epidemic of Native American childhood obesity and the high rates of type 2 diabetes. Today, the foundation continues to champion Native American children's health, believing that health is the cornerstone to achieving one's full potential. To achieve our mission, which is to ensure Native American children achieve their full potential by advancing cultures of Native American community health, we work with and support tribal communities and Native-led organizations in their efforts to help Native youth to be healthy and physically active for their lifetime. Our work includes programming through our NB3 Fit programming, grant making, research and evaluation, and advocacy. We believe that all communities have the inherent knowledge, values, and assets to resolve their own challenges and achieve their successes. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the issue of hunger was one of the many immediate issues that we felt we needed to address. Due to the generosity of our donors, our organization, along with many partners, packed and delivered over 67,000 pounds of food, over 100 gallons of water, and various supplies to our tribal communities in our area. We also led organizations and tribal communities in 14 states with grant awards from our COVID-19 Response Fund, over half of which specifically address hunger and supplying food to families in need. Our story and the work we do are just one example of what's being done across Indian country to address the challenges our communities face due to systemic racism. We hope what everyone remembers from the pandemic is the incredible strength and resiliency of Indigenous communities to protect and provide food and basic resources to their people, reaffirming our belief that Indigenous communities have the inherent knowledge and values to resolve their own challenges and achieve their own successes. Thank you so much for inviting us to this conversation today.
Thank you, Cyan. So glad you could be here. Stephen, you're up next.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. I represent Unidos US. For those of you who may not be familiar with my organization, you may have known us by our former name, the National Council of Latinx. We changed our name a few years ago, but while our name has changed, who we are fundamentally has not. Now over 50 years old, we remain the nation's largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization, working to increase opportunities for the nation's nearly 60 million Latinos. We like to say we do our work via 3 Ps. One, expert policy research and advocacy. The second P, through culturally responsive and linguistically appropriate programming in partnership with our communities. And the third P is people, via our network of nearly 300 autonomous community-based organizations located in 37 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. Collectively, we leverage these assets to advance our mission and have impacts. And we really believe that the work that we're doing this moment in time couldn't be more important given the impact of COVID on our communities, the disproportionate harm that we've been experiencing, along with the economic crisis. Yesterday, our country reached a grim milestone, with over 500,000 lives lost to COVID-19. And last week, new data came out showing the decrease in life expectancy of our country as a whole, but also a decrease in years for our Black brothers and sisters of 2.9 years, and for Latinos, 1.9 years. So today's conversation, I think really, as we talk about hunger, we are also going to, I think, be underscoring the fact that all of these things are linked together, right? That the inequities that have been longstanding, that the pandemic has exploited and exacerbated, they're all linked. And so I'm looking forward to today's conversation, both to highlight the stories of our respective communities, but also identify solutions to move forward to a more equitable and just country for all.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much. Dr. Marjorie Innocent.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. I am the new role, the Director of Learning and Impact, think Evaluation and Research at the association, was the health director for a number of years. And as many of you likely know, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People has been in effect since 1909, focused on the elimination of race-based discrimination for Black people and ultimately for all people in our country. And our goal really started a long time ago in the history of lynchings of Black people that had become really commonplace in our country. And since then, what we recognize within very short order is that our very survival is actually tied to efforts to ensure our ability not just to survive, but to thrive. As Stephen was saying, that means that for us, we fight for equality of rights, pushing for legislation that will make sure that we are all able to succeed, that we are all seen the same, and all of the work that we do also undergirds our ability, our collective ability, to be able to be and to succeed and to thrive, to be healthy and to be well. And so all of the work that we do ultimately is focused on policy change. It's focused on the elimination of racism. It's focused on well-being, and ultimately on galvanizing people to be part of the process for change.
Thank you, Dr. Innocent. Thank you very much. And now I turn to Gina Cummings.
Thanks, Michael. I'm Gina Cummings. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy, Alliances, and Policy at Oxfam America. And I am very much looking forward to this conversation, both to contribute, but also to learn. Let me tell you a little bit about Oxfam. We are a global organization working to end the injustice of poverty. We hold the powerful accountable. We help build better lives for people and let them build lives for themselves, and we save lives in disaster. We work globally and here in the US. We really focus in 3 issue areas. The first is humanitarian crises. At the heart of Oxfam's work is a belief in the capabilities and the leadership of individuals at the community level. In our experience, vulnerable people understand best what resources they need to better prepare for natural disasters and to survive conflicts. That same is true in times of war and during climate disasters. Oxfam helps refugees and people who have been forced to flee their homes to access shelter, food, cash, clean water, and sanitation. We work alongside community advocates who speak truth to power with their country governments. We also work on food security. Our planet produces enough food to feed us all, and yet more than 800 million people go to bed every night hungry. Why is that? It's because our food systems are failing. Oxfam works to protect food producers and the planet. We focus our efforts on the people who grow and process our food, and we demand urgent global action to respond to climate change. Marginalized food producers and workers, especially women, communities of color, immigrants, and young people, are the people who are most likely to experience hunger and poverty. Oxfam works to protect their livelihoods, help them claim their rights. We also mobilize consumers to challenge national governments and companies to rewrite their policies and practices, to provide living wages, worker protections, and sustainable agricultural programs that address mass production and the processes that have a negative impact on the environment. And then finally, we work on gender justice because we envision a world where women and girls gain power over every aspect of their lives. Oxfam has made gender justice a critical component in every country and community in which we work. Although men and women have similar needs and ambitions, women do not have the same access to resources that men have. Oxfam's understanding of that disparity shapes the way we design and evaluate all our programs and all of our policy initiatives. We are helping women and girls overcome gender discrimination, realize their full potential, assume leadership roles in their communities, live lives free from violence, and breaking the cycle of poverty. We tackle the root causes of poverty to create real lasting change. We believe in the power of people to end poverty. Poverty is not inevitable. It's the result of human action and inaction. And because poverty is human-made, we all have a role to play in it. Thanks.
Thank you, Gina. And thank all of you for going along with my reverse alphabetical order. As a person named Wilson, I have experienced the historic discrimination that comes with the alphabet. And I think all of us understand how historic discrimination works. And I joke about alphabetization, but when you're Wilson, you're always last or near the end. And there's a way we can adjust that and way we try to address that. And I think that's part of the conversation we're going to have today. And so I'm going to begin with an overarching question for all of you, and then we'll continue to have a conversation with specific questions for each of you. So one of the things I think we all know is that the pandemic has not only exacerbated the existing food inequities in the nation's food systems, is revealed the inequities that were already existing. What changes, what modifications, what improvements have you experienced because of the pandemic that you believe should be continued beyond the pandemic, or probably should have been implemented anyway? I'm going to start with you on that one, Gina.
Okay, thanks. I'm getting the order thing now. It's really been, a strange and difficult year. As Stephen said, with 500,000 deaths in the U.S. and more than 2.3 million around the globe, it's been tough. And then, yet there's been some good things that have happened as well. For me, the pandemic has offered a real opportunity to have a shared experience with people all around the world, which is crazy, but it's incredibly rare. And, no matter who you are, rich or poor, where you live, each of us have been impacted. And there are a couple of gifts in that. And one of them for me is that we've been able to see, and I mean really see, the realities that face essential workers every day. The bus drivers, the grocery workers, the farm workers who do the essential work keeping our economy going and our lives moving forward. And we've seen now with some new eyes the impact that consistent low wages and unsafe conditions and a climate of anxiety and fear have had on these workers. And these impacts, they aren't new. They've always been there. But COVID-19 has exacerbated and exposed the situation. We've also seen the levels of bravery and desperation that workers have faced as they've continued to show up to their jobs in order to feed, shelter, and care for their own families. Their vulnerability has actually become our vulnerability. And the thing that's happened that is employers have been compelled to make changes to hold on to their workers and to keep their workers safe. We've seen wage increases, hazard pay, emergency leave that's never been there before, increased safety standards. And those are the things that need to stay permanent as we move forward. We need to ensure the kind of financial, emotional, and physical well-being of our workers and their families. The thing I always say is, we call them essential workers, but they were essential before the pandemic, and they will be essential after the pandemic. And so, the thing that I'm hoping is that we hold that in our hearts and in our policies as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Gina. Let's do Stephen and then Marjorie and then Cyan on this very same question about the pandemic's impact, about what it's not only exacerbated, but what it's revealed. Stephen?
Sure. I mean, as Gina was saying, those of us here today, we've been working long time, right, to bring attention to these issues, these stories and conversations. I think the pandemic, as well as broader conversations around race and racism in this country, I would submit has expedited some of the conversations, and I think has forced our country to be able to have some of these hard conversations. We've long believed that, to Gina's point, we knew who the essential workers were in our country, right? Hopefully more Americans do now, right? We long knew that when you can center policies and practices on the experiences of some of those who face some of the most challenging times, you can make policies and practices work for just about anybody, right? So now we're in a moment in time where on the federal policymaking side, we're talking about equity, we're talking about inclusion on many fronts. And I would argue that we have to take this opportunity out of crisis to take this opportunity to really hold firm on this conversation around racial justice and racial equity, and to hold folks accountable for delivering on what they're talking about, right, with action. And so that can be, on the economic security front, making sure that communities that, the Latino community never fully recovered from the Great Recession, 2007 to 2008. So in terms of economic security, we were behind, right? And then the economic crisis and the pandemic struck. That didn't stop our community from working harder and longer, some taking multiple jobs just to make ends meet, right? And so all that to say that we have an opportunity right now to really ensure that we're prioritizing our communities that have for too long been on the periphery of how to do things moving forward. And so I just think that, again, whether it's on healthcare, economic security, hunger, or education or other issues, that this is a moment where we should be really affirming that we need to center the lives and experiences of some of the most historically vulnerable in our country.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stephen. I appreciate that. I mean, we've heard more conversations about the importance of farm workers in the last year than we had in the past 20 years. And it's like people didn't realize the importance of farm workers to be ability for people to be able to have food.
My dad was a grocery store clerk and my mom was a school cafeteria. No question that were they not retired, they would have been on the front lines helping our families and communities survive. Right? But again, we all knew this, for so long. And so hopefully, the rest of the country is waking up to how important these folks are and how we need to do right by them in this moment and moving forward.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Marjorie.
So I fully agree with what my colleagues, Gina and Stephen have said. I'll add two things. One is positive, one is not, but is real. It certainly has meant that and this is a combination, to be clear, of the pandemic and its impact, as well as I'll just leave it at police brutality that we saw last year as well, really has led to an intentional, explicit focus on race and equity and racial equity. Three things within our policies, our federal policies, in a way that we have not seen in our country, arguably in multiple generations, and perhaps in the very, 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 very long time. And that is not, as we've heard, something that everyone in our country is comfortable with. I push us back only to January 6th, which gets to the less positive part of what I wanted to lift up, to see that there are many in our country who are not satisfied with the direction that we have been going in, are not satisfied with intentional efforts to focus on race and equity, and are perfectly willing, able, prepared to do whatever they think is necessary to push back on that agenda. That is also part of the very difficult reality that we knew that we've been living with, but that we're now seeing in a way that we certainly have not seen in decades. as being, really explicitly manifested in the country. And so as we work to continue to change public policy and really change the framework of the social policy through which we are helping to make sure that everyone's got, baseline level of needs that are met, and we're defining what those are. We're certainly seeing the importance of the need for stronger civil rights protections, quite frankly, for everyone. But we also see, in case we had any doubts, that public policy helps to create a space through which people can have certain benefits, but absolutely does not legislate hearts and minds. That is work that actually happens over time as policies are in place. And so I think that's something that we absolutely have to recognize and should not sleep on, if you will.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you raised that issue about the racial justice, racial equity going on in the country in the last year. And I just want to add that as I sit here in Baltimore, Maryland, where we saw the police killing of Freddie Gray in 2015, not in the last year, and we're still suffering from the results of that. I think upholding the challenges that our nation is facing and the way we're trying to face them is critical. We can't address it if we can't look at it and talk about it.
That is absolutely correct. And for too long, we either made assumptions that we were in better times, or we just didn't deal with it and figured that, we could keep moving forward. And as long as there was enough of a critical majority that supported, progress and change, we'd be good. Surprise. And so the reality now is, we're really realizing that we've got a much more complex job ahead of us. And ultimately, the changes that need to happen really make a difference for people in terms of their survival, for sure, as we've been seeing, but also their ability to be able to function on a day-to-day basis. And that includes their ability to be able to get food, to get basic nutrition food, and to be able to know with a certain level of comfort that that's not going to be something that's going to be threatened on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Thank you very much. So, Cyan, you also have a very particular perspective about this, about the pandemic and its impact on the communities that you represent, and not only the things that it has made worse, but the things that it's also made obvious. Can you tell us about that from your perspective?
Yes. Thank you. So there are things that have come out that we've already known that affect our communities. And a lot of them, are negative and just things of like access to healthy foods, and where a lot of our people live on food deserts, and the local, grocery store is an hour one way, or the lack of infrastructure of running water and things that are just basic needs to every person, not just Native American people, but every person. But with all those things that have been highlighted, also things that have come that are positive are like with our funders, our supporters being more open to general operating funds and allowing us to reallocate any existing funds to address our community's most urgent needs. So, lack of running water, then we're going to be able to supply some water to those people in those areas. This flexibility allows us to support communities and organizations without being overly prescriptive, us going in and saying like, well, we think that you need this or that, we're only going to provide food because we know that's what you're lacking, when that isn't always what's lacking. So we're allowing our communities to really focus on outcomes that have a lasting or long-term effect, not just immediate need right in that second. And this goes along with allowing our individuals and communities to self-identify what that need is. And for example, in distributing food boxes, we didn't ask for identification or proof of need, of income, or anything like that. We just said, if you need it, come get it. And we will try our best to get it to you if you can't come get it. So there are many factors that contributed to many families needing that support, with job loss and just everything that happened. They may not have needed it pre-pandemic, but this has just shown that, we have given them that freedom to say, this is what we need. And we've done our best to try to help them in that way. But going forward, that we hope that, we can continue this, not just when we're in crisis, when people come to us and say, this is how we need your support, or we go to funders and say, this is how you can support our Native communities and families, by allowing them to self-identify the need and to really go and tell them these are the ways in which we can heal our community, and these are the ways in which we can help our own members, and not necessarily rely on others from the outside to come and tell us how to fix those issues that we already know that we've had for a long time.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated to hear your response. I mean, I think the current headlines on the news is about the deep freeze in Texas and how many people are without running water, and how can they be without running water, because we presume that under normal circumstances, everybody has running water. Apparently that's not true.
No, that's not true. And many of our reservations, like I said, are in rural and remote areas. And so not only is there the lack of infrastructure there, so there's no running water. So families have to haul water almost on a daily basis, not only for their own needs as far as cooking, cleaning, drinking, hygiene. They also have livestock and other things that they have to take care of. And if they don't have access, to water to irrigate, their crops and things like that. It's very eye-opening for people that don't realize that there are places here in the United States, here in my state of New Mexico and others, that don't have basic infrastructure for, running water, electricity. Not only is there sometimes not running water, that infrastructure, but a lot of the times too, the water that is in the area could be contaminated. So a lot of our tribal communities, our reservations have been exploited, for natural resources. And so mining and things like that with the runoff and all of that stuff that goes into our water systems, that also affects the ability for families and communities to have safe drinking water. So there's just a lot of eye-opening, perspective from that really there are people here in the United States that do not have access to clean, drinkable water.
Well, thank you for sharing that for the folks who in the back who didn't know that before this conversation. So Gina, I want to turn to you. No matter how well the economy seems to be doing, and for some people, it always does well. Poverty and hunger continue to be consistent problems in the country. Why are they so persistent in what is the richest country in the history of the world?
It's funny. The poverty rate, does fluctuate, but not by a lot. The most recent figure before the onset of COVID is that roughly 14% of people live in poverty. That's about 44 million people. And that's in real poverty, struggling to stay afloat with a roof over their head, food on their table. And a lot of that is because of the way that we reward work in this country. It's simple. People who work full-time live in poverty. It's bad for those families. It's bad for our society. It's bad for the economy. And a lot of that is due to the fact that the federal minimum wage is stuck at poverty level. It's been $7.25 for 11 years, which means that a person who works 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, is making just over $15,000 below the poverty wage. Sheer math, a person who works full-time in this country earning the federally mandated wage is very, very likely to be living in poverty. Hunger is a problem of poverty, but it is also at heart a problem of the working poor, which is at the end of the day, a problem about marginalized populations. And the reality is that these populations are vastly and disproportionately people of color, immigrants, refugees, and women. America has a long history of squeezing value out of working bodies, and we continue to do it over and over again, keeping people in poverty. I think that's one of the reasons why we have this long-standing problem, even though we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
Thank you very much. Marjorie, Black households, by and large, face hunger at a rate more than twice that of white non-Hispanic households. What are the primary drivers of this divergence, and what needs to be done to address it?
Well, we've heard about some of this already. One of the primary drivers is absolutely the issue of income insecurity, the lack of sufficient income to be able to, as the saying goes, not just make ends meet, but even be able to pass that threshold. Because we're assuming, of course, that, let's just see what we can do so people can make ends meet. We should want more for people than the ability for them to just be able to skate by. So there's a great percentage of people for whom income security is a major issue as a function of their jobs. Income security creates larger problems, or the baseline income allows them to be able to meet certain needs on a regular basis, but they've got choices that they ultimately have to make that mean that certain other needs, like food, sometimes have to get compromised. The healthcare, I should say the health status and healthcare challenges that they face also create a financial impediment for them, because number one, the burden of disease that Black people in this country have, I think we've heard a lot about it, and it's across the board for a number of conditions. But that also means that when they need to get health care, because they very often are diagnosed at later stages of disease, their healthcare costs tend to be higher. Because they have more disease, their healthcare costs tend to be higher. And as a function of the types of jobs they have, a lot of them do not have any healthcare coverage. Or if they do have it, it's insufficient. In addition to that, some of the housing challenges that a lot of Black people face as well, in terms of living in substandard housing, in terms of discrimination that they face with getting housing, whether rentals or for home ownership, also exacerbate the problem further. And in the list of, and then, we can talk about the challenges around education, both in terms of quality of education and the cost of education, which further compounds the problem as well. There are environmental challenges that they face as well, in terms of some of the toxic areas, if you will, or the toxic substances that are part of the areas, where they live. In some cases, is even in the materials that are used within their living spaces, that also, will exacerbate their health and lead to problems long term. And so when we think about all of these challenges together, for so many people, especially for those who are living with lower incomes, or even who are living in, what they would consider to be middle income ranges, one disaster can literally become disastrous for their finances and have, some really long-term ramifications, and their ability to be able to buttress those kinds of challenges, like we literally have seen, within the past year. It was, mentioned, previously also with the, the subprime mortgage crisis, that eventually led to, a lot of a major economic downturn. The amount of time that it took, for a lot of families to be able to recover, for those that even actually recovered. Now we're talking about a crisis that's literally across the board. And so what that means literally for people's ability to be able to make it, and then to be able to, rebuild and to move forward, to be able to advance, some level of financial support, if you will, again, to buttress these kinds of challenges in the future, it just becomes literally, a rat on a treadmill situation. And in some cases, they never make it. They never make it at all. So that's the reality that a lot of families, a lot of Black families, in particular, have been living in. And I hate to say it, but I think, and this is across the board for all of our populations, I think what the impact on the children is going to be over the course, that's going to become more apparent to us, I think, over the course of the next several months and years, is going to be a sin and a shame, truly.
Well, thank you for that. And so speaking of the children, Stephen, I want to turn to you for a second. Prior to COVID-19, 17% of Latino children lived in a food insecure household versus 10% of non-Hispanic white children. It's estimated that as high as 47% of Latino households with children have reported food insecurity since the pandemic began. Talk to us about how some of the unique challenges that Latino families face with children when it comes to food insecurity.
Sure, and maybe I can just build off of what Marjorie was saying too. Latinos, we have one of the highest workforce participation rates in the country. The reality is that we're often working in low-wage jobs, to Marjorie's point earlier, that don't offer health insurance benefits, right? And so when you think about the choices that families have to make, do I pay for that medical care because we don't have health insurance? Do I pay rent? Or do I try to figure out how I put food on the table, right? So there are already these structures that are enabling these sort of poverty types of environments that our community is finding itself in. And like I said at the beginning of my remarks, all of these are interconnected, right? The fact that we work, but we're working in low-wage industries. We have one of the highest uninsured rates, and we have one of the highest food insecurity rates just broadly. And we still haven't recovered from the Great Recession of like 2007, 2008. But with respect to our children, right? We knew that our children were already in a precarious position before the pandemic. As I think about for Latino children in particular, 1 in 10 are uninsured. We have second to Native children, we have the highest uninsured rate in the country. 1 in 4 are living in poverty, and 1 in 6 are living in food insecure households. We knew these things before the pandemic, and to the point you made earlier, Michael, right? The pandemic has just blown a hole through that and further sort of undermine the health and economic futures of our kids. With respect to sort of the challenges that the Latino community is facing, I've talked about the economic security one, or the insecurity. To put it more specifically, we also know that there are what we would call discriminatory policies in place. After 1996 welfare reform, lawfully present immigrants were stripped of benefits that prior to that they had access to. And we've been working over the past few decades to try to restore those benefits for children and adults. So, on the issue of hunger, the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, prior to 1996, lawfully present folks were eligible. And then the welfare reform put into place this 5-year bar that folks had to meet before they could become eligible. Unidos US helped to lead the fight to lift that restriction for lawfully present children, but to this day, it's in place for lawfully present adults. Again, this is restoring something that was taken away from them, right? So in this moment of a pandemic, when the country is facing a hunger crisis, it makes no sense that you would still keep these discriminatory barriers in place, right, for people to access food. And the link to children, around 95% of Latino children are US citizens, but over half live in a household with at least one non-citizen parent. And it creates this environment that we refer to as the mixed immigrant status household, right? And so we're seeing that children who are eligible for these important federal programs are not accessing them, either because of confusion, right? That the parents may think that, well, they're not eligible, so then my child isn't eligible, right? So you have kids going hungry. We also know that there has been such a large amount of anti-immigrant rhetoric and policy, both in the past few years, but we saw, previously too, with immigration enforcement in the interior, with raids and separation of children and families, that collectively it's created an environment of fear and anxiety and confusion for so many of our families, right? And then, there are more that I could say, but the last one that I'll just touch upon is around the lack of a culturally responsive and linguistically appropriate approach to how we meet families where they are, to make them aware of resources that are available to them, and then to work with them to get them enrolled in the programs that they're eligible for. So, again, the eligibility restrictions, the rhetoric that our communities have experienced, and then just the lack of a targeted approach to meet the unique experiences and challenges that all of our communities face. but that need, a bit more intention in order to get our folks connected to the services that they are eligible for.
Yeah. So I gotta say, you're referencing the anti-immigrant animus, which flows throughout this entire country, has only made food insecurity for our neighbors and folks in our community worse. And we've got to find a way to address that. We need to address the immigration issues as well, but we can't let that anti-immigrant bias, that discrimination, that hatred stop us from solving the food insecurity issues which exist in our community.
And we know, just to put a final point, we know that, mixed status households, immigrant issues are not just a Latino issue, right? We know that our brothers and sisters are living in other communities. So, I think too often it's sort of framed as solely Latinos, but we know, right, there are so many others of our brothers and sisters facing similar experiences.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So, Cyan, we also know that Native Americans suffer some of the highest rates of food insecurity, poverty, diet-related diseases, and other challenges due to historic and continuing systemic and institutional inequities. Can you talk to us some about the unique factors that affect access for Native American families in need? And particularly, I know we talked earlier about some of the diversity of the community, which is all over the United States, not just in New Mexico where you are, but everywhere, and their languages, their tribal customs. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, within the United States, I believe there are 574 federally recognized tribes. And so that is 574 different cultures, languages, obviously reservations. And so everybody's challenges are the same, but also different. So, for many Native families living on the reservation, there are several factors that could affect access to healthy, affordable foods. And, earlier I said that one of those challenges is location. Where we live, many people know the term food desert, but they know that for urban areas. But that also is true for us on our reservations at times, and many of our communities are considered food deserts. So, for example, many of our reservations, again, are in rural or remote areas, and so oftentimes it's a long haul to get essentials that are needed, and then again there are very little options once they arrive. In addition to those things are the infrastructure issues that we've already touched on, and so how are folks gonna prepare these foods if they don't have the water to cook with, or how are they going to store their meats and fresh produce safely to have access to that? So then that creates issues of, are we getting the most nutritious food? Probably not, because we're looking for the things that we're going to be able to store safely. Income for us, our rates of employment are incredibly high, and the wage gap. So the ability for families to afford food is already going to be hard. And then with the pandemic, we've seen increased unemployment, and then also price, for groceries and for essentials have increased. So that is just helping us to have more issues and see a greater need. So obviously families are going to try to afford the most affordable things, and then it might not be the healthiest choice. The other thing is that multi-generational families live together, and so they're not only feeding just their immediate family with their children, but they're trying to make everything stretch and trying to make sure that everybody has something. It's often not enough. So there are just a lot of factors that play into that.
Thank you very much for that. I'm conscious of our time and the number of questions that I'd like to ask all of you. So let me do one question next and see if we can hopefully get to a second and potentially a third round. And I'm also going to take kind of the moderator's prerogative. So, what's the policy change that you push for or that you saw happen in the pandemic that you feel is most significant or impacted people the most, or that you'd like to make sure continues going forward? We've seen a lot of policy changes at the federal level, in some cases at the state level, in some cases at the local level. So think about that policy change. I'm going to go to you first, Marjorie, and then Gina, and then Stephen and Cyan. But I'm going to jump in first and throw something in from my own perspective. So one of the things that we know for SNAP participants, SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, is the biggest challenge for most folks is that it's an inadequate benefit, that the minimum benefit in most places in the United States was $15 a month, and that there were millions of people getting $15 a month, but that during the pandemic in a lot of states, that was raised up to the maximum benefit. So people were getting, $135 where they used to get less. It's still not enough, but it made a huge difference as prices for food were going up. It's not a perfect solution. As Stephen has pointed out, there are too many people who were formerly eligible who are now not eligible. There are all kinds of barriers to people getting participation. But that's the one thing that I think that we've done, which I'd like to see going forward, because that makes such a huge difference, not only in the lives of people who get benefits, but also in the economic life of our communities, where people can spend those benefits at grocery stores, at farmers markets, at local stores. It means a big deal. So I'm going to turn to you, Marjorie, about the policy change that you'd like to see moving forward.
I couldn't agree with you more, Michael. And, tied to that, what I hope is that the commitment that we have seen in the new federal administration to look at our domestic policies through a racial equity lens, very intentionally. That is one of the mandates that former Ambassador Susan Rice has received. I really sincerely hope will lead to a new vision for the types of policies that we actually will really push for both immediate and longer term solutions, not just to the pandemic, but what the pandemic actually helped to unearth. The reality of the inequities that have been longstanding in our country, the fact that, this has been a function of, structural barriers that are deeply rooted in policies that absolutely were not designed, to really create a more level playing field for people. They helped to create a certain level of advancement, if you will. They actually created barriers for others, but the extent to which within any individual policy, let alone the collective, right, the collection of policies, really, ultimately try to advance, more opportunity, and do so more equitably for everyone in the country, clearly can be debated, within 5 seconds. And I'm really hoping that the fact that we are now looking at these policies through a racial equity lens will mean a big difference, not just for all the populations we're talking about here, but ultimately we'll be able to advance the country overall. And this is for, policies tied to nutrition, tied to housing, tied to, economic security, tied to healthcare, all across the board. So that for me is truly the biggest source of hope for me.
Great. Thank you. Gina.
Yeah, for me, I think the best way to talk about it is to tell the story of a woman we met, Miss Dorothy. This was, in the early part of COVID, when restaurants and other businesses are just beginning to shut their doors. And we had an opportunity to meet Miss Dorothy down in Jackson. She's a Black woman from Jackson, Mississippi. And she told us how worried she was. She was staring down bills that were about to hit hard at the end of the month. She had a mortgage payment. She had a car payment. She had to pay a food bill. She had actually just put a gallon of milk in her freezer to make sure that there would be something there in the weeks to come. And until COVID struck, Miss Dorothy had been getting by. She worked full time in a small family restaurant for many, many years. And yet, when COVID hit in 2020, she had no savings, she had no benefits, she had little hope. And she told us, quote, "So many people are devastated. We're all up in the air. We're already one paycheck from being evicted and being in the street, are not having food for our families. It's a guessing game every day. We're in dire need." And here's the problem. Miss Dorothy at the time was making the federal minimum tipped wage, which is $2.13 an hour. It's crazy, which means that even though when she was doing well, she was still scrambling each month to keep it together and to support her family. You know, Miss Dorothy's bright. She's hardworking. She enjoys the job. She talked a lot about the customers she served all the years and that she was going to miss as they shut down. But she's also in her 60s. She had, little savings for retirement. She had just recovered from pneumonia herself, which had kept her away from her job for 2 weeks, which was a tremendous blow for people with low-wage jobs who, have little to no benefits and no paid leave or health insurance. When you don't have the money, your family can't go to the doctor. Your children may not get the education they need. You can't feed your family and you simply don't eat. So for me, I think about Miss Dorothy. I think about her a lot. And I think about her, especially when I do my own food shopping. I drive to the store, I buy everything I want and probably things I don't actually need, like the chips and the candy and all that. And I drive home and I put it away in my fridge. I have ample storage in my house and I'm set. And I don't think that I won't have enough to eat. And it's true that I work hard, but so does Miss Dorothy and all the millions of people like her. They work really hard. And the only difference between Miss Dorothy and me is they simply just have lower wages. And so for me, that's the thing that we can fix. We can fix it. We have to fix it. If we want to fix poverty, we want to deal with hunger, fixing that kind of wage discrepancy, that's got to be the first thing on the list. $2.13 for a tip just makes no sense. So that's what I'd like to see change.
Yeah. Gina, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing Miss Dorothy with all of us. We really appreciate that. Stephen.
Yeah, well, I just want to echo, thank you, Gina. I'm going to have Miss Dorothy in my mind and my heart moving forward, so thank you. If there's any silver lining to what we've experienced, it's the fact that we have an opportunity to write a new playbook. And, the comments from my colleagues today, right, again, an opportunity to center lives and voices that for too long have been shut out or not given the honor and respect that they deserve. So we have an opportunity as a country to write a new playbook that is really centered on those experiences. And again, if we can create a system that works for some folks who have some of the most challenging circumstances, we can create a country that works well for just about anyone, right? And so I just on a big scale, I want to put that out there. Just specifically with respect to the pandemic, the pandemic EBT program that was scaled up this year. Once a radical idea of universal school meals or trying to get as close to universal school meals as possible, we've actually, have made progress in making that happen, right? With pandemic EBT and trying to meet the needs of our kids to minimize hunger for them when they were out of school. I would submit that, we need to take things that we're seeing as temporary, right, and make them permanent. And we've already demonstrated that we can make this happen, right? If we have the political will, right, and the commitment to do this. So I would like to, again, going forward and using pandemic EBT as an example, to make some of these ideas that folks, have long been thinking about, right, to make them permanent, whether it's in future COVID relief. We have a child nutrition reauthorization that hasn't been reauthorized in over a decade. That's up for reauthorization. How to make sure that, again, these ideas that were once just sort of on the wonderment list are now something that we can make permanent for our children and families in this country moving forward.
Thank you very much for raising up pandemic EBT. It was a good program that's made a big difference in the lives of millions of children all across the country. Thank you. Cyan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So one thing that I know that we're looking forward to is supporting tribal policy advocacy organizations to address all of these issues for long-term change and investments in our tribal communities. And, it's really awesome to see the increase of Native Americans being represented in all levels of government. We're really happy to see, our Native American Congresswoman, Deb Haaland, as well as Sharice Davis, who are really pushing for the systemic change in many issues, not just hunger, but a lot of issues that affect Native Americans. And so we're just really excited to support and to see that. And then, in fact, today our confirmation hearings, for Congresswoman Haaland, and if she is confirmed, she will be the first Native American Secretary of the Department of Interior. And this is just amazing, and it's so important because this department directly oversees programs that affect Native people and communities. So we're really just looking forward to supporting, and just seeing those changes happen from all levels, from our tribal governments to state governments to our national government.
Yeah, it's an example of how we often say representation matters, and being able to see yourself in leadership and in different roles. And the fact that there's never been a Native American leading that agency in the history of the country. This is a barrier that was gonna be broken, should have been broken before, and hopefully be broken now. We've got 6 minutes left, and I'm gonna try to fill up that 6 minutes. I want you guys to help me fill up this 6 minutes. And I'm not traditionally a person who wants to end everything with a happy note, because we've talked about hard issues, right? About race, about food insecurity, about the impact on immigrants and Native Americans, and African Americans, and just really challenging stuff. But for there are lots of people out there who are listening to this conversation, and for them, some of them may have heard things they didn't know before, and they may have learned from what you have shared. If you could share one more thing in the last 5 minutes that we have, so I'm going to ask you to do it in a minute so then I can potentially weigh in too, is what's the tangible action that every person who's watching at home can take to end child hunger in their community, whether it's locally or nationally or in their state? What's the one thing you would encourage them to do? And I'm going to turn to Stephen to go first, to give us an example of that one thing, and then Marjorie, and then Cyan, and then Gina. And if there's time left, I'll weigh it.
I would just encourage everyone, go to unidosUS.org or follow us at We Are Unidos US on social media, just to learn more about our organization and the collective work that we do. I will just make a push for civic engagement and for folks to be exercising their civic voice. Many of the issues that we're talking about today, right? We got to build power in our communities. We got to build political power. We got to make sure that we're setting and influencing the policy agenda, whether it's on child hunger or health or economic security or housing or other issues, right? And it's not just every 4 years when there's a presidential election. We know at the local and state levels, so many of the decisions that are made, right, are affecting the lives, the Miss Dorothys in our lives, right, that we care about so much. And so, and if you're not registered, make sure you're registered. If you're not voting, right, make sure you vote. And every election matters. Elections have consequences, which we've seen so clearly. And if you've already taken care of that, right, grab your neighbor, your friend, your loved one. But I think the civic engagement piece is so fundamental to our ability to grow our power and our ability to help, manifest these solutions, right, and these ideas that we've been talking about, because for too long we haven't had the voice and political power that our communities deserve and need. So I'm just going to make that push for civic engagement, moving forward.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Marjorie?
Literally what Stephen said. Literally. Let's be clear, what we have seen in the past year at this point, not even a full year, that's the best part. This is basically since May, right? So about 9 months, is literally our democracy in action. The good, the bad, the ugly. But we all need to be in. We all need to lean in. And as he said, if you already are fantastic, encourage others to do it as well. And let's be clear that changing policy is ultimately what we need to do. This is changing public policy at governmental level. It's changing organizational policies, right? It's changing, school policies, what we call small P policies. It's straight across the board. And that's work that takes time. It takes commitment. It takes all of us really, leaning in. So please don't lose hope, don't lose faith. We're at a critical juncture right now, literally in our democracy. This is the time where we're either going to really lean in and make the changes that are going to set us on the right course, a better course for the future, or where we're literally going to stumble. So please, thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. Cyan.
I would totally have to agree. And I also want to add that, if you're already doing all these things, if you're able to contribute to the causes that will help deliver long-term solutions and empower these communities. There are so many community-led initiatives that address hunger and other issues in our Native communities and all of your communities as well. And they need help to continue doing their work. So look up and fund those organizations, including those organizations that advance Native American food sovereignty. Native communities, our people know what our needs are and how best to identify and implement meaningful long-term change to face those challenges. And so we need that support. And so thank you all.
Great. Gina.
Okay, so everything that everybody said, I'd only add one thing, which is believe it's possible. Believe change is possible. See what's happening in our communities, and then do everything that Cyan and Steve and Marjorie said. But believe it can be done.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to add one thing to what everybody said and agree with everything else, which is that if the only time you participate in policies on election day, you're leaving out too much. You need to raise your voice. You need to speak out every day. Members of Congress, members of the state legislature are voting on issues like this every day. I just got a notice that a bill that we're supporting in the state legislature is passed in the House today. You can't wait for election day only to make this happen. Whether you're registered or not, raise your voice. Call a member of Congress, call your state legislature. Tell them what's important to you in your own words. I want to thank you all for this great panel. This has really, really been helpful. You guys have done a great job educating me, I hope educating each other, and educating the world. And I want to thank Chobani for giving us an opportunity to have this great conversation. Thanks very much.
Thank you.